The obsidian floor of the Arena of Echoes was so polished I could see my own terrified reflection staring back at me. It wasn't a pretty sight. My flight suit was scorched, my left boot was missing a heel, and I had enough bruises to map out a new star system. But the most pressing issue wasn't my fashion sense. It was the 3 meters of singing, translucent steel hovering an inch from my jugular. "Yield, human!" The voice vibrated, not just in my ears, but in the very marrow of my bones. I looked up. Empress Lyraxa Vane didn't look like she had broken a sweat. Her skin, the color of moonlight on a frozen lake, glowed with a faint, rhythmic silver pulse. Her eyes were two pools of burning violet, swirling with a mixture of predatory focus and something that looked suspiciously like disappointment. She was wearing the empathic weave, a suit of armor that looked like liquid shadow, currently spiked with sharp, jagged edges that reflected her combat-ready state. "I've had worse dates," I wheezed, tasting copper in my mouth. "At least you haven't asked me to pay for the appetizers yet." A ripple went through the crowd. Thousands of them. The Umbra. They sat in the tiered stands of the arena, silent as gravestones, their red eyes glowing in the twilight of Nyctos. They didn't cheer, they didn't boo, they just fed. I could feel it, a subtle tugging at the edges of my mind, like a dozen tiny vacuum cleaners trying to suck the fear right out of my pores. "You speak of trivialities while your life hangs by a thread," Lyraxa said, her blade humming a low, mournful C-sharp. "You invoked the ancient frequency. You challenged the bloodline. Do you even understand the gravity of your situation, Jace Varrow?" "Honestly?" I grinned, though it felt more like a grimace. "I was mostly thinking about how much my shins hurt, and maybe wondering if you've got a return policy on this whole matrimonial combat thing." She tilted her head, a movement so fast and fluid it made my eyes ache. The blade didn't waver. "The law of echoes is absolute. A heart's cry, once broadcast, cannot be unheard. You called to the void, and the void answered. Now, the void requires your resonance." I felt the tug again, stronger this time. The arena itself was a giant resonator, designed to amplify every flicker of terror, every spark of defiance. I was a battery, and they were the grid. If I yielded now, they'd let me go. But I'd be an empty shell, a man without a spark, sent back to the gutter I came from. "Well," I said, reaching slowly into my utility belt for a small, illegal gravity flare I'd scavenged from a wreck 3 months ago. "If you wanted a spark, Your Majesty, you should have just asked." How did I get here? Good question. It's a classic story, really. Boy meets girl. Boy gets drunk. Boy accidentally broadcasts a marriage proposal to a trans-dimensional empire of emotion-eating space vampires. Let's rewind to 48 hours ago. Back to Nebula 9 Station. Back when my biggest problem was figuring out how to tell my landlord that stellar radiation had eaten my rent money. The bar at Nebula 9 smelled like recycled oxygen, cheap synthetic gin, and the desperate sweat of 100 different species who all had one thing in common. They were hiding from something. It was called the Rusty Bolt, which was a bit redundant considering the whole station was basically a collection of rusty bolts held together by prayer and static electricity. I was 3 rounds deep into a bottle of Comet Tail whiskey, which is less of a drink and more of a chemical weapon used for clearing industrial pipes. It burned going down, but at least it drowned out the voice in my head reminding me that my ship, the Stardust Mucker, had been impounded by the Syndicate. "Another one, Zog," I slurred, waving a shaky hand at the bartender. Zog 6, a gaseous entity encased in a pressurized suit that looked like a very grumpy diving bell, hissed a puff of green vapor. "Varrow, you are approaching the limit of your credit and your liver. Perhaps you should bug out before the enforcers find you." "The enforcers can kiss my thrusters," I muttered, leaning my head against the sticky counter. "I'm a 34-year-old salvage diver with 0 ships, 50 credits to my name, and a permanent ban from the Inner Rim. I'm basically a ghost who forgot to die." I stood up, swaying as the artificial gravity of the station took a sudden, nauseating dip. In the corner, a group of Xylos, insectoid traders with too many eyes, were betting on a game of holographic poker. In another, a disgraced military officer was crying into a plate of nutrient paste. Loneliness is a funny thing. In deep space, it's a physical weight. It presses against your chest until you feel like you're being crushed by the vacuum itself. I looked around the bar and realized I was the only human in the place. The only one who needed air and warmth and maybe a reason to wake up tomorrow that didn't involve scrounging for scrap. My eyes fell on the ether box sitting on a small stage in the center of the room. It was an ancient piece of tech, a relic from the first expansion, used for public announcements before everyone got personal comm links. Lately, it had been glitching, broadcasting static into the local sector. A stupid, whiskey-fueled idea started to germinate in my brain. "Hey, listen up, you freaks and fossils," I shouted, clambering onto a chair. The bar went quiet. A dozen different types of eyes turned toward me. Zog 6's suit whistled a warning tone. "I've spent 10 years hauling your junk across the void," I announced, my voice cracking with a mixture of booze and bitterness. "I've been shot at, spaced, and cheated by every syndicate boss, from here to the core. And you know what I've got to show for it? This empty glass." I stepped onto the stage, nearly tripping over a power cable. I grabbed the Ethervox microphone. It hummed with a strange violet energy I should have recognized as dangerous. Instead, I just leaned into it. "I'm done, I'm retiring, but I don't want to go alone." I laughed, a loud echoing sound that felt good to let out. I threw my arms wide, looking at the ceiling, at the stars I knew were just beyond the hull. "Who wants to marry me? Anyone. I don't care if you've got tentacles, scales, or 3 heads. I just want someone who won't charge me for fuel." I pulled the trigger on the mic, holding it for 10 seconds too long. I didn't see the sparks flying from the base of the machine. I didn't see the way the station's power grid flickered as the Ethervox drew a massive surge of energy, tapping into a hidden, sub-quantum frequency that had been silent for 7 centuries. "Come on," I yelled into the void. "Who wants a piece of Jace Varrow? I'm a high-maintenance gearhead with a heart of gold and a credit score of 0. Any takers?" The laughter from the bar was immediate. The Xylos clicked their mandibles in amusement. Zog 6 hissed a derisive cloud of vapor. I felt like a king. The king of fools, maybe, but a king nonetheless. Then the air in the center of the bar simply tore. It wasn't like a ship dropping out of warp. There was no sound, just a sudden bone-chilling drop in temperature. Frost began to bloom on the whiskey glasses. The laughter died so fast it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. A seam of violet light appeared in the air, widening into a vertical rift. It looked like a wound in reality, bleeding shadows. And then she stepped through. She was nearly 2 meters tall, draped in armor that seemed to be made of solidified night. Her hair was a waterfall of silver, and her eyes, those burning violet eyes, swept over the room with the terrifying grace of a supernova. The Xylos scrambled under their tables. Zog 6's suit let out a high-pitched whine of pure terror. I just stood there, the microphone still in my hand, feeling the comet tail whiskey suddenly turn to lead in my stomach. She walked straight toward the stage. Each footfall sounded like a drumbeat in a tomb. She stopped 3 feet from me. The cold radiating off her was so intense I could see my breath in the air. "The call was heard," she said, her voice a melody of blades. "The obsidian frequency has been answered." I said, my brilliant wit failing me. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just..." She reached out, her fingers, long, elegant, and tipped with silver glass claws, grabbing my chin. She forced me to look into those violet depths. I felt a sudden sharp pull in my chest, a sensation of being seen on a level that was almost painful. "You are a creature of intense resonance, Jace Varrow," she whispered, her gaze tracing the scars on my face. "Desperate, lonely, shattered. You are the perfect candidate for the bloodline." "Wait, bloodline? You mean like vampires?" I managed to squeak. "We are the Umbra," she said, and for a second I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not hunger, not malice, but a profound ancient weariness. "And you, little scavenger, have just issued a challenge to the Empress of Nektos. By the law of echoes, I accept." "Accept what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The marriage," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her pale lips. "Or the execution. In my world, they are often the same thing. Now bug out. We have a planet to save." Before I could say another word, she grabbed the collar of my flight suit. The world turned into a kaleidoscope of violet shadows and screaming gravity. I was officially the worst salvage diver in history. I had tried to throw away a joke, and I'd ended up catching a goddess. The transition through the rift didn't feel like flying. It felt like being dragged through a keyhole by your eyelashes while 1,000 angry bees stung your nervous system. Space and time folded into a series of nauseating, violet geometric shapes, and just as I was about to cough up my own soul, reality snapped back into place with the subtle grace of a freight train hitting a brick wall. I hit a floor that was impossibly smooth and unnervingly cold. My knees buckled, and I did what any self-respecting human ambassador would do upon arriving on a legendary alien world. I threw up a generous portion of Comet Tail whiskey and station-grade synthetic nachos right onto the pristine obsidian tiles. "Welcome to Nyctos, consort." Larax's voice drifted down to me, cool and completely devoid of the nausea I was currently battling. "Our atmosphere is 98% nitrogen and oxygen, with a trace of argon and noble gases. You should find it breathable, if a bit thin for your primitive lungs." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and looked up. The bar was gone. The smell of grease and despair was replaced by something sharp and metallic, like the air right before a lightning strike. We were in a hall that defied every law of architecture I'd ever learned in salvage school. The walls were made of black glass that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic violet light, curving upward for at least 50 meters before vanishing into a ceiling of swirling shadows. There were no lamps, no visible power cables. The light seemed to be bleeding directly out of the stone. "Nice place," I wheezed, pushing myself to a standing position. My legs felt like they were made of overcooked noodles. A bit gloomy on the decor, though. Ever thought about some throw pillows? Maybe a nice yellow rug to brighten things up? "This is the pinnacle of echoes," a new voice snapped. I turned and saw a man, if you could call him that, approaching from the shadows. He was shorter than Laraxa, dressed in a high-collared robe of deep crimson that looked like it had been woven from dried blood. His skin was the color of old parchment, and his eyes were narrow slits of glowing orange. He looked at me with the same expression a gourmet chef might give a cockroach that had just crawled onto his signature dish. "Her Majesty has brought home a biological disaster," the man said, his voice a dry rasp. "Majesty, the High Council is already in session. They are not amused by this performance." "The Council is rarely amused, Crix," Laraxa replied, her posture shifting into something regal and terrifyingly stiff. "And Jace Varrow is not a disaster. He is a resonator. Did you not feel the frequency he broadcast? It reached the obsidian core. It hasn't been triggered by a soul since the Great Hibernation." Crix walked in a slow circle around me, his nostrils flaring. "I feel only the stench of low-grade intoxicants and fear. He is a scavenger, a creature of meat and water. How can a thing that lives for a mere 80 years provide the sustenance our people require?" "Hey, watch the meat talk, chummer," I snapped, my human stubbornness finally overriding my terror. "I've survived 3 hull breaches and a syndicate hit squad. I'm not just sustenance. I'm a high-performance salvage professional who's currently very confused and very annoyed." Crick stopped in front of me, his orange eyes flaring. "You speak of survival? You are a candle flickering in a hurricane. We are the Umbra. We have seen empires rise and fall while we sat in the silence of the dark nebula. We do not eat food, human. We do not drink water. We consume the only thing in this universe that truly matters, the energy of the spirit." He leaned in closer, and I felt it again. That sudden, hollow tugging at my chest. It felt like my heart was a sponge being squeezed dry. My breath hitched, and for a second, the room started to spin. "Back off, Crix," Laraxa commanded. The air between us shimmered, and the tugging sensation vanished. "He is not to be harvested. He is a suitor. Until the trials are concluded, his resonance belongs to the throne." Crix bowed, though the movement was dripping with silent contempt. "As you wish, Majesty. But the hunger of the people is growing. If this human fails to satisfy the core, they will not be content with a symbolic marriage. They will want his marrow." With a final chilling look at me, Crix vanished back into the shadows. "What did he mean, harvested?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I liked. "And what's this about satisfying a core? I thought this was just a weird space wedding." Lyraxa turned to face me. The jagged spikes on her armor smoothed out, shifting into a softer, more fluid pattern. She walked toward a massive window that looked out over the city of Nyktos. I followed her, and the view nearly knocked the remaining whiskey out of my system. The planet was beautiful and terrifying. Because it was tidally locked to a dying red dwarf star, there was no sun, just a perpetual, deep crimson twilight. The city was a sprawling web of obsidian towers, interconnected by bridges of glowing violet light. Below us, forests of bioluminescent trees pulsed in patterns that looked like a heartbeat. But far off in the distance, I could see areas where the light was fading, great patches of gray, dead stone where nothing moved. "My people are fading, Jace," Lyraxa said, her voice dropping the royal mask for a brief second. "The Umbra are not like humans. We do not generate our own vitality. We are collectors. We take the excess energy produced by sentient emotions, love, rage, grief, hope, and we convert it into the life force that sustains our world. For thousands of years, we were the keepers of the galaxy's stories. We traded technology for the right to witness the lives of others." "Space vampires," I whispered. "You're literally feeding on our feelings." "A crude term," she replied, looking at her pale, elegant hands, "but accurate. However, the galaxy has changed. It has become cold. Modern species are guarded, their emotions muted by technology and cynicism. We have become starved. The obsidian core, the heart of our world, is running dry. We have been in a state of cultural stagnation for 5 centuries. If we do not find a source of pure, unadulterated resonance soon, our world will go dark, and we will simply stop." She turned back to me, her violet eyes searching mine. "Then your voice hit the frequency. It wasn't just a shout, Jace. It was a cry of such pure, raw loneliness and defiance that it jump-started the sensors in the throne room. It was the loudest thing I have heard in 300 years. I looked at the floor, feeling a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. "I was just drunk and sad, Lyraxa. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who lost his ship and didn't have anywhere else to go." "That is exactly why you are here," she said softly. She stepped closer, and this time, the cold didn't feel threatening. It felt like the coolness of a quiet night after a long, hot day. "A human who feels so much that he screams at the stars. That is a treasure on Nyktos. But the Council will not accept you based on my word alone. You must prove that your resonance can sustain the crown. You must face the trials of the matrimonial combat." "Combat," I muttered. "Great. I'm a lover, not a fighter, and I'm not even a very good lover." "It is not a battle of blades, though there will be steel," she explained. "It is a battle of essence. You must show the Umbra that a human soul is not a flickering candle, but a sun. If you succeed, you become my consort, and our people have a future. If you fail—" "I know," I said, looking out at the dying crimson sky. "I become a snack for the High Council." "I will not let that happen," she said. The intensity in her voice was sudden, like a spark hitting tinder. "I have waited a long time for a voice like yours, Jace Varrow. I do not intend to let it be silenced." For a moment, we just stood there, a salvage diver and an alien queen, caught between the shadows of a dying world. I realized then that she was just as lonely as I was. I had a bottle, she had an empire. Both were just different ways of hiding from the silence. "Well," I said, trying to regain my swagger, "if I'm going to be a space prince, I'm going to need a better pair of boots. These ones are definitely not royal grade." Lyraxa let out a sound, a soft, melodic vibration that I realized was a laugh. It was the most beautiful thing I'd heard since I left the Inner Rim. "We shall see about the boots, human," she said, her eyes twinkling with violet fire. "But first, we must see if your heart can survive the training." The next morning, or what passed for morning on a planet that lived in eternal twilight, I was woken up by a small floating orb that emitted a sound like a swarm of angry mechanical wasps. I swatted at it, nearly falling off the bed, which was basically a slab of obsidian covered in a layer of soft, self-warming moss. "5 more minutes, Zog," I groaned, forgetting where I was. "I am not Zog," the orb chirped in a voice that sounded like crickets on a bad day. "I am Unit 7B, and you are late for your primary calibration. The Empress does not appreciate tardiness in her suitors. I sat up, the events of the previous day hitting me like a physical punch. Right. Alien world. Space vampires. Possible execution via soul-sucking. I looked at the outfit laid out for me, a form-fitting suit of black charcoal silk that seemed to ripple when I touched it. It was light as air, but felt tougher than my old salvage gear. No pressure, I muttered, pulling on the suit. It clung to my skin like a second layer of muscle. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. The stubble was still there, and my eyes were still bloodshot. But the black suit made me look like I belonged in a high-stakes heist instead of a dumpster fire bar. I was led through a series of winding corridors to a room called the Resonance Chamber. It was a perfect sphere of white marble, which stood out in stark contrast to the rest of the dark palace. In the center stood Laraxa. She wasn't in her armor today. She wore a simple gown of flowing violet silk, her silver hair cascading down her back like a frozen waterfall. "Today we test your volume, Jace," she said, her voice echoing in the spherical room. "My volume?" I asked. "I don't have a volume knob, Laraxa. I just talk." "Every sentient being has an emotional frequency," she explained, walking toward me. "Most species spend their lives at a whisper. They suppress their grief, they hide their joy, they mute their anger. The Umbra have learned to amplify these frequencies. To survive here, you must learn to broadcast. If your resonance is too low, the arena will crush you. The spectators will subconsciously draw from you until there is nothing left." She gestured to the walls. Suddenly, the white marble turned transparent, revealing thousands of Umbra standing in the hallways outside. They weren't looking at me with curiosity. They were looking at me with need. Their red eyes were wide, their pale faces pressed against the glass. I could feel it again. That tugging, that sense of my energy being pulled in 1,000 different directions. "They are hungry," I whispered, my heart rate beginning to spike. "They are starving," Laraxa corrected. "Now I want you to remember something. Something that made you feel truly alive. Not the whiskey, Jace. Not the salvage. Something that burned." I closed my eyes. My mind instinctively went to the Stardust Mucker. It was a beat-up third-hand hauler with a temperamental warp core and a cargo hold that smelled like ozone. But it was mine. I'd spent 7 years repairing every bolt, greasing every gear. It was my home. I remembered the day the Syndicate took it. I remembered the sound of the magnetic clamps locking onto the hull, the way the enforcers laughed as they dragged me off the bridge. I remembered the sheer helpless rage of watching my life's work being towed away into the dark. "I can feel it," Laraxa whispered. She was standing right in front of me now. "The anger. It's jagged. It's bright orange. But it's focused on the past. Bring it to the present, Jace. Don't just remember it. Live it. It's hard to live it when I'm standing in a marble ball being watched by a bunch of ghouls." I snapped, my eyes flying open. "Use that," she commanded. "Use the annoyance. Use the fear. Amplify it." I tried, I really did. I thought about the unfairness of it all. I thought about being a human in a galaxy that didn't care if I lived or died. I thought about being a consort because I'd made a drunken mistake. But the more I tried to force it, the more it felt fake. The tugging from the walls got stronger. I felt cold. My limbs started to feel heavy, as if the air itself was turning into lead. "He is flatlining," a voice hissed. I saw Crick standing in a balcony above us, his orange eyes glowing with triumph. "His resonance is fading. He is a gutter candle, Majesty. He cannot even sustain a single chamber, let alone the core." "Shut up, Cricks," I growled, but my voice was weak. I sank to one knee. The Umbra at the glass were leaning in, their eyes pulsing in sync with my failing heartbeat. It felt like I was being bled out, but instead of blood, it was my very sense of self. "Jace, look at me," Laraxa said. She knelt in front of me, taking my hands. Her palms were ice cold, but her eyes were like twin furnaces of violet light. "Don't fight them. Don't try to be a warrior. You aren't one. You're a salvage diver. What do you do when a hull is collapsing? What do you do when the vacuum is screaming at the door?" I looked at her, and for a second, the palace vanished. I was back in the void. My oxygen was at 5%. The Stardust Mucker was venting atmosphere. I was alone in the dark, and death was an inch away. I don't give up, I whispered. I find a way to patch the leak. I find a way to keep the lights on. I don't care how ugly the fix is. I just keep going. Then keep going, she urged. Show them the stubbornness of a creature that refuses to go quiet. Show them the beauty of a mess that won't be cleaned up. I didn't think about rage then. I didn't think about the syndicate. I thought about me, Jace Varrow, the guy who could fix a warp drive with a piece of chewing gum and a prayer, the guy who could find a diamond in a scrap heap. I thought about the sheer, ridiculous absurdity of my life. I was a human, a tiny, short-lived speck of dust, standing in the heart of an immortal empire, and I was still talking back to the Empress. I started to laugh. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was a raspy, defiant cackle that came from deep in my gut. You want resonance? I shouted, standing up. I felt a surge of heat erupt from my chest, pushing back against the cold pressure. You want a show? Fine. Watch this. I didn't try to broadcast a single emotion. I just let it all out at once. The loneliness, the humor, the grief, the absolute unshakable belief that I was too stubborn to die. I felt like a fuse had just been tripped in my brain. A wave of golden red light erupted from me. It hit the marble walls like a physical blow. The Umbra behind the glass recoiled, their red eyes widening in shock. Some of them actually shielded their faces, as if the light were too bright to look at. By the seven shadows, Crix whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. It's chaotic. It's unrefined. It's intoxicating. The tugging stopped. It didn't just stop, it reversed. I felt a surge of energy flowing into me from the room, fed by the shock of the spectators. The marble walls began to hum, vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache. Lyraxa stood there, her hair whipping around her face as if caught in a psychic wind. Her gown was glowing, absorbing the golden red light I was shedding. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. It wasn't royal approval. It was hunger. But a different kind of hunger. The kind a person has for a glass of water after 40 years in a desert. Enough, she called out, though she sounded breathless. The light faded. The room returned to its quiet, white state. The Umbra outside the glass remained frozen, staring at me as if I were a miracle and a monster all rolled into one. I felt exhausted, my muscles trembling, but for the first time in years I didn't feel empty. Well, I panted, leaning my hands on my knees. Was that loud enough for you? Lyraxa walked over to me. She didn't say anything at first. She just reached out and touched my cheek. Her hand wasn't cold anymore. It was warm. She was drawing from the heat I just generated. It was a symphony, Jace, she whispered. A messy, loud human symphony. The council will be terrified of you. And the people will want to consume you until there is nothing left. I'm getting a real mixed message here, Lyraxa, I said with a tired grin. Am I the savior or the main course? Both, she said, her violet eyes soft. In our world, the two are inseparable, but you have passed the first calibration. You have shown that you can broadcast. Now you must learn to survive the feedback. The arena will not just take from you. It will throw your own emotions back at you, amplified 1,000 times. If you are not careful, your own heart will tear you apart. Standard Tuesday for me, I joked, though my heart was still racing. You should rest, she said, her voice returning to its regal tone. Tomorrow we begin the combat training. Real steel this time. Crix will be your instructor. I looked up at the balcony. Crix was still there, watching me with a look of intense, clinical interest. He didn't look like he wanted to execute me anymore. He looked like he wanted to take me apart to see how the gears turn. He's going to try to kill me, isn't he? I asked. He will try to push you to your breaking point, Lyraxa corrected, because in the arena, the spectators will do the same. If you break there, Jace, I cannot save you. The law of echoes is a circle. What you broadcast, the world returns. If you send out fear, the world will become a nightmare. If you send out hope, the world becomes a fairy tale? I asked skeptically. No, she said, turning to leave. The world becomes worth saving. I watched her walk away, her silver hair shimmering in the violet light. I was a salvage diver. I knew when something was worth fixing and when it was just scrap. As I looked at the dying world of Nyktos through the transparent walls, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for hers. I sat down on the marble floor, my breath finally evening out. I had no ship, no credits, and a bunch of space vampires wanted to eat my soul. But for the first time in 34 years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a man who had finally found a job that mattered. "All right, Nyktos," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see what else you've got. But I'm telling you now, I'm a real pain in the neck to swallow." As I left the chamber, I noticed a small detail I'd missed before. On the obsidian floor where Laraxa had been standing, there were a few drops of liquid. Not blood, not tears. They were violet, glowing slightly, and they smelled like winter starlight. She was resonating too. For the first time in centuries, the Empress was feeling something, and it was all because of a drunken shout from a man who thought he had nothing left to give. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and headed back to my moss bed. I had a long way to go before the arena, but at least the lights were still on. And in the dark nebula, that was more than most people ever got. The Shadow Vault was not a gym. It was a torture chamber designed by someone who thought gravity was merely a suggestion and pain was a spiritual achievement. If the resonance chamber was about volume, the Shadow Vault was about frequency control. It was a cavernous, spherical room situated deep beneath the obsidian crust of Nyktos, where the air smelled like ozone and ancient, dusty circuits. I was suspended 20 meters above a floor of jagged amethyst shards, held in place by a flickering magnetic harness that felt like it had been manufactured during the era of steam engines. It groaned every time I moved, and the red warning lights on my harness were blinking in a rhythmic pattern that translated roughly to, "You are about to have a very bad day." "Your center is drifting, human," Crix's voice echoed from the observation deck. He looked like a crimson-clad vulture perched on a rail of black glass. "A salvage diver should have better spatial awareness. Or do you usually just tumble through the void until you hit something expensive?" "Funny guy," I grunted, trying to stabilize my rotation. "Usually I have a ship with actual thrusters. This harness is a piece of junk. It's got a lateral drift of at least 5 degrees, and I'm pretty sure the magnetic coils are about to short circuit." "Excuses are the language of the weak," Crix replied. He tapped a control panel, and the gravity in the room vanished. Then it reappeared at 90 degrees. Then it started oscillating. In the arena of echoes, the crowd will not provide you with a stable floor. They will pull at your perception. They will make you feel like you are falling upward into a burning sun while your feet are frozen in ice. If you cannot hold your internal resonance steady, you will be torn apart before the Empress even draws her blade. I tumbled through the air, my stomach doing a frantic tango with my throat. I managed to kick off a floating obsidian pillar, spinning myself toward a small platform. I slammed into it shoulder first, the impact knocking the wind out of me. "Zip it, Crix," I panted, clinging to the edge of the platform. "I'm working on it." "Work faster," he snapped. "The High Council has moved the trial forward. They believe your presence is a contamination. They want you purged before the crimson moon reaches its zenith in 3 days." I pulled myself up, sitting on the cold, vibrating stone. Why do they hate me so much? I'm one guy. I'm basically a biological curiosity. What's the harm in a little human flavor in the palace? Crix stepped off the balcony, descending toward me on a platform of solid shadow. "You are not just a flavor, Jace Varrow. You are a variable. Our society is built on the predictable harvesting of echoes. We know exactly how a Zillion grieves. We know the precise caloric value of a Zarathai's rage. But you? Your emotions are a messy, overlapping soup of contradictions. You feel joy in the middle of a disaster. You use humor to mask terror. You are unpredictable, and to an immortal race that relies on stability to survive, unpredictability is a virus." He landed on my platform, his orange eyes burning with a strange intensity. "The Empress sees you as a cure. The Council sees you as a plague. If you fail in the arena, the Council wins. They will close the borders, sink Nyktos back into total isolation, and let the race fade away in quiet, orderly extinction rather than risk the chaos of the outside world." I looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. He wasn't just a grumpy bureaucrat. He was a man watching his world die, torn between the safety of the old ways and the terrifying uncertainty of the new. "So you're on her side?" I asked. "Lyrax's side?" Crix was silent for a long moment. He looked out into the vast, dark emptiness of the vault. "I am on the side of survival. If a messy human is the only thing standing between my people and the great silence, then I will make sure that human is the most dangerous mess in the galaxy." He reached into his robe and pulled out a hilt made of white bone. He handed it to me. "This is an ego blade. It has no physical edge. It projects a field of focused intent. If your resonance is strong, it will cut through obsidian like butter. If your will wavers, it is nothing more than a paperweight." I took the hilt. It felt heavy and strangely warm. I tried to focus, thinking about the stardust mucker, about the sheer stubbornness that had kept me alive through a dozen hull breaches. A faint, flickering orange light sputtered from the hilt, barely 6 inches long. "Pathetic," Crix sighed. "You are thinking like a victim. You are thinking about what was taken from you. Think about what you are going to take back." I closed my eyes. I didn't think about the ship. I thought about the way Lyraxa had looked at me in the resonance chamber. I thought about the fact that she was the first person in 10 years who didn't look at me like I was a loser. I felt a surge of something, not rage, not fear, but a quiet, rock-solid determination. The blade hummed. The orange light lengthened into a meter of steady glowing energy. It hummed at a frequency that vibrated in my palm. "Better," Crix admitted. "Now defend yourself." He didn't wait. He drew his own blade, a dark, violet sliver of light, and lunged. The next 2 hours were a blur of motion, pain, and the smell of ozone. Crix moved like a shadow, striking from angles that shouldn't have been possible. I wasn't a swordsman, but I was a salvage diver. I knew how to move in 0G, how to use momentum to my advantage. I didn't try to parry his strikes with finesse. I used the environment. I kicked off pillars, used my harness to swing around obstacles, and used the ego blade to create shields of orange light. "You fight like a gutter rat," Crix shouted, his blade clashing against mine in a shower of sparks. "I'm a survivor, chummer," I yelled back, socks landing a heavy kick against his chest that sent him flying back into a gravity well. "In my world, there are no points for style." We were both panting, circling each other on a floating slab of obsidian, when the air in the vault changed. It wasn't the gravity shifting. It was a sudden, sharp spike of absence, a void within a void. "Crix," I whispered, my instincts screaming. "Something's wrong." Crix froze, his nostrils flaring. "The resonance, it's being dampened." From the shadows of the vault's upper reaches, 3 figures descended. They weren't wearing the royal crimson of Lyraxa's guards. They were draped in cloaks of glimmer silk, a material that bent light, making them look like ripples in a dark pool. They didn't carry ego blades. They carried pulse needles, long, thin weapons designed to bypass armor and deliver a lethal dose of resonance poison directly to the heart. "Shadow stalkers," Crix hissed, his face turning an even deeper shade of pale. "Lord Draven's personal assassins. They've bypassed the palace wards." "Assassins? Already?" I gripped the ego blade, my orange light flickering as my heart rate tripled. "I haven't even had breakfast." "Bug out, Jace," Crix commanded, stepping in front of me. "Get to the lift. I will hold them." "And let you get spaced?" "Not happening, old man," I said, my human stubbornness flaring up. I looked at the assassins. They were moving with terrifying silent speed. "We do this together." The first stalker lunged, moving through the air like a predatory bird. Crix met him with a flurry of violet strikes, the 2 of them becoming a blur of shadow and light. But the other 2 were circling, their red eyes fixed on me. They knew I was the primary target. I didn't have Crix's centuries of training. I didn't have his speed, but I had a utility belt full of scavenged junk and a brain that was wired for emergency repairs. I reached into a pouch and pulled out a handful of magnetic microbearings, surplus parts from a Mark IV stabilizer. I threw them into the air and triggered the magnetic pulse on my harness. The bearings didn't hit the assassins, but they created a cloud of high-velocity shrapnel that disrupted their glimmer silk cloaks. Suddenly, the ripples became solid figures, tall, gaunt Umbra, with faces twisted into masks of cold hatred. One of them hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pipe, and lunged at me with a pulse needle. I didn't parry. I dropped the ego blade, which immediately went dark, and dived under his strike. As I passed, I grabbed the heavy power cell of my harness and ripped it free. "Hey, Sparky!" I yelled. I jammed the live cell into the assassin's leg armor. The suit, designed to regulate resonance, wasn't built to handle a raw surge of 3,000 volts of unrefined electricity. There was a bright blue flash, a smell of burning ozone, and the assassin was thrown backward, his armor sparking and smoking. The third stalker paused, his eyes wide with shock. He'd never seen a combatant use dumb tech like a weapon. In a world of spiritual energy and focused intent, a direct electrical shock was the equivalent of bringing a sledgehammer to a poetry reading. "My turn," I grinned, picking up the bone hilt. I didn't think about orange light. I thought about the sheer, ridiculous audacity of surviving this. I thought about how much I wanted to see Laraxa again. The blade didn't just glow, it roared to life, a blinding, chaotic pillar of golden orange energy. I lunged, not with a strike, but with a roar. The assassin tried to block with his needle, but the ego blade shattered the thin weapon like glass and caught him across the chest. He didn't bleed. His resonance simply erupted outward in a shower of violet sparks. He collapsed, his form flickering as his internal energy was disrupted. Crix finished off the first stalker with a precise strike to the neck junction. The vault went silent, the only sound being the heavy thud of my boots hitting the obsidian floor as the gravity finally stabilized. I stood there gasping for air, the orange blade slowly fading back into the hilt. My hands were shaking, and my shoulder felt like it had been branded with a hot iron. Crix walked over to me, looking at the two downed assassins and then at me. He looked at the smoking power cell I'd used as an improvised grenade. "You used a battery," he said, his voice flat with disbelief. "A primitive, chemical-based storage device." "It worked, didn't it?" I wheezed. "Sometimes you don't need a fancy sword. You just need a lot of volts in the right place." Crix looked at me for a long time. Then he did something I never expected. He reached out and gripped my shoulder. "You are a disaster, Jace Varrow," he said, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of something like respect in his orange eyes. "A messy, chaotic, brilliant disaster. If you survive the arena, I might actually have to admit that the Empress was right." "Don't get all sentimental on me, Crix," I said with a weak smile. "I still haven't gotten those boots." We left the vault as the palace alarms began to wail, a sound like 1,000 mourners crying out in the dark. The war for Nyktos had officially begun, and I was right in the middle of it, armed with a bone hilt and a brain full of scrap. The aftermath of the assassination attempt was a whirlwind of violet-robed guards, shouting counselors, and the cold, oppressive weight of impending doom. I was taken to a private medical suite, a room carved entirely from white crystal that supposedly had healing frequencies. I didn't feel very healed. I felt like I'd been put through a trash compactor and then pelted with gravel. My shoulder was a mess of purple bruising where the pulse needle had grazed me, and my nervous system felt like it was still vibrating from the electrical surge I'd triggered. "Hold still, Jace." Laraxa's voice was a soft command. She was sitting on the edge of my crystalline bed, her hands hovering inches above my skin. A soft violet light flowed from her fingertips, sinking into my shoulder. The pain didn't just go away, it dissolved, replaced by a cool, tingly sensation that made me want to purr like a cat. "I can do this myself, you know," I muttered, though I made no move to push her away. "I've patched myself up with industrial sealant and duct tape before. This is just a scratch." "It was resonance poison," she replied, her face a mask of concentrated effort. "If I had been 5 minutes later, your heart would have forgotten how to beat. Lord Draven is not playing games anymore. He is desperate. He sent his personal goons to a training session," I said, looking at her. "That's not desperation. That's a declaration of war." Laraxa sighed, the light from her hands fading as the bruising on my shoulder vanished. She looked tired, truly tired. The silver of her hair seemed a bit duller, and the violet of her eyes wasn't as bright. "The council believes I am sacrificing our heritage for a whim," she said, looking at the crystalline floor. They don't understand that heritage is a living thing. If it doesn't grow, it rots. They would rather Nyctos be a beautiful, silent tomb than a living, breathing world with a human in the palace. And what about you? I asked softly. I reached out, hesitating for a second before taking her hand. Her fingers were cool, but they tightened around mine instantly. Is this still just about the core? Am I just a very expensive battery to you? Laraxa didn't look up. At first, yes. I saw your broadcast and I saw a chance. A spark to jumpstart a dying engine. I thought I could bring you here, use your resonance to stabilize the planet, and then, I don't know, send you back, keep you as a pet? A pet? I grinned. I'm very high maintenance. I need a lot of snacks, and I have a tendency to chew on the furniture. She finally looked up, and I saw a flash of genuine pain in her eyes. But then you started talking. You started joking. You fought for Crix when you could have run. You looked at our dying world and you didn't see a monster. You saw something worth fixing. I have lived for 750 years, Jace. I have seen the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. But I have never met anyone who treats life with such casual bravery. She leaned closer, and the air between us started to hum. It wasn't the aggressive resonance of the training vault. It was something else, something warm and soft and terrifyingly intimate. You are not a battery, Jace Varrow, she whispered. You are an echo that has finally found its home. I felt my heart skip a beat, not from poison, but from the sheer weight of her words. I was a salvage diver from a dirt rim station. I was a guy who'd spent his whole life feeling like a spare part in a galaxy that already had too many. And here was an Empress, a being of near immortal power, telling me I was home. Well, I said, my voice a bit huskier than usual. I guess I'd better not screw up the arena then. It would be a real shame to ruin the decor. Laraxa leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. The arena is more than a test, Jace. It is a conduit. When the crimson moon reaches the zenith, the planet's consciousness, the ancient will wake up to witness the union. It will try to draw from both of us. If our resonance isn't perfectly synchronized, if there is even a sliver of doubt or fear between us, the ancient will consume you. It won't be a harvest. It will be an erasure. Synchronized, I repeated. You mean like we have to be on the same page? In the middle of a fight? We must be one, she said. In the Umbra culture, the matrimonial combat is a literal merging of spirits. It is why our weddings are so rare. Most cannot handle the exposure. They see the darkness in their partner, and they recoil. They see the secrets, the flaws, the hidden shames, and the connection breaks. So, you're saying you're going to see everything? I asked, a sudden cold sweat breaking out on my neck. The time I accidentally blew up a syndicate refueling station? The fact that I still haven't paid off my bar tab at Zog's? My secret collection of vintage space hero comics? Laraxa let out a soft laugh, and the warmth between us deepened. I will see the man who felt so alone that he shouted at the universe, and I will show you the woman who has been a queen for so long she forgot how to be a person. Are you afraid, Jace? Terrified, I admitted honestly. But I've been afraid my whole life. At least this time, I'm afraid of something beautiful. We sat in silence for a while, the crystalline walls of the med bay glowing with a soft, comforting light. I realized then that the turning point wasn't the assassination attempt. It wasn't the training. It was this quiet realization that we weren't just two different species trying to survive. We were two broken souls trying to build something whole. But the moment was broken by a chime at the door. Crix entered, his face grim. Majesty, he said, bowing low. Lord Draven has requested a formal audience with the High Council. He is claiming that the assassination attempt was a staging by the Crown to justify a purge of the nobility. He is calling for the matrimonial combat to be moved to tomorrow evening. Laraxa stood up, her regal mask snapping back into place instantly. Her silver hair seemed to crackle with static. Tomorrow? The moon will not be at the zenith. The connection will be unstable. That is exactly why he is doing it, Crix said. He knows the human isn't ready. He knows the synchronization will fail. He is betting on the ancient will to do his dirty work for him. Laraxa turned to me, her eyes swirling with a mixture of fury and fear. Jace! I stood up, ignoring the protest of my aching muscles. I looked at the black suit I was wearing, then at the bone hilt sitting on the bedside table. I thought about the Stardust mucker, about all the times I'd had to fix an engine while the ship was literally falling apart around me. "I'm never ready, Laraxa," I said, offering her a reckless salvage diver grin. "But I'm really good at improvising. If Draven wants a show tomorrow, let's give him one he'll never forget." Crix looked from me to the Empress, then nodded slowly. "I will prepare the arena. I suggest you spend the next 24 hours resting, or whatever it is humans do to prepare for their certain demise. I think I'll start by finding those boots," I said. As Crix left, Laraxa turned back to me. She didn't say anything, but the resonance flowing from her was thick with a protective, almost possessive energy. She reached out and touched the hilt of my ego blade. "Jace," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "the arena is a mirror. It will show the crowd what we are. Are you ready for them to see us?" I took her hand, pulling her closer until I could feel the rhythmic pulse of her heart, or whatever served as a heart for an Umbra, beating against my chest. "I've spent 34 years hiding in the shadows, Laraxa," I said. "I think I'm ready for a little light, even if it's violet." She kissed me then. It wasn't like a human kiss. There was no heat of breath, no soft press of lips. It was a sudden, overwhelming surge of knowing. I felt her centuries of duty, her crushing weight of responsibility, her secret desire to just run away into the stars. And she felt my scrap heaps, my jokes, my stubborn, unyielding hope. For a second, we weren't a human and an alien. We weren't a queen and a scavenger. We were just two frequencies, finally finding the same chord. The kiss ended and she stepped back, her eyes glowing brighter than I'd ever seen them. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we change the galaxy." She left the room with the grace of a predator, leaving me alone in the crystalline light. I picked up the ego blade hilt. It felt different now, lighter, more like a part of my own arm than a tool. I looked out the window at the city of Nyktos. The gray patches, the areas of dead stone, seemed a little smaller tonight. Or maybe it was just my imagination. I had 24 hours to prepare for a fight I couldn't possibly win, on a planet that wanted to eat me, against a woman I was pretty sure I was falling in love with. "Just another day at the office, Varrow," I muttered to myself. "Just don't forget the duct tape." I lay back on the moss bed, closing my eyes. I didn't dream of red dwarf stars or violet rifts. I dreamt of a small, beat-up ship called the Stardust Mucker, flying through a nebula that wasn't dark at all. It was full of light, golden, messy, human light. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one on the bridge. The turning point had passed. The dice were cast. Tomorrow I'd either be a king or a memory. But as I drifted off to sleep, I realized I didn't care which one it was, as long as the void was finally quiet. The roar of the crowd was a physical weight, but it was a silent one. Thousands of Umbra filled the tiered benches of the Arena of Echoes, their pale faces illuminated by the violet luminescence of the obsidian walls. They didn't cheer, and they didn't chant. They simply sat in a state of hyper-focused hunger, their red eyes creating a shimmering sea of embers in the twilight. I could feel them. It was like standing in front of a massive intake fan that was trying to pull the very air out of my lungs. They weren't just watching, they were leaning into my spirit, testing the structural integrity of the human soul they had heard so much about. I stood in the center of the obsidian floor, feeling smaller than a speck of dust in a nebula. I had finally gotten the boots Laraxa promised. They were made of a dark, flexible material that felt like it was bonded to my skin, providing perfect traction on the slick, black stone. I wore a suit of ceremonial armor that was less about physical protection and more about amplification. Every time my heart beat, the silver filigree on my chest pulsed with a soft, amber light. Across from me, 60 meters away, Laraxa emerged from the shadow of the royal archway. She was magnificent and terrifying. Her armor was no longer soft or fluid. It was a jagged, crystalline nightmare of violet and black, reflecting the cold, sharp necessity of her role. In her hand, she carried the Night Whisper, a blade of translucent shadow that seemed to drink the light of the arena. "Jace," she said, her voice echoing through our mental bond like a bell ringing in a deep canyon. "You must not hold back. If you try to play the martyr, the crowd will sense the weakness, and the ancient will reject the union. You have to fight me with everything you are. I gripped the hilt of my ego blade, the bone cold against my palm. I'm a salvage diver, Laraxa, I projected back, trying to keep my mental voice from trembling. I spent my life avoiding trouble, not picking fights with planetary monarchs. My best move is usually a fast retreat and a loud apology. The time for apologies is over, she replied. The crimson moon is nearly at the zenith. The planet is waking up. As if on cue, the floor beneath my feet began to vibrate. It wasn't a mechanical hum. It was a deep, tectonic groan that felt like a massive heart starting to beat after 1,000 years of sleep. The gray patches of the city had been growing, but here in the heart of the world, the energy was concentrated. The ancient will, the collective consciousness of every Umbra who had ever lived and died, was focusing its attention on the two figures in the center of the arena. A gong sounded, a deep, resonant tone that felt like a ripple in space-time. Laraxa moved. She didn't run. She vanished in a blur of silver-violet light and reappeared 10 meters in front of me. The night whisper came down in a brutal arc. I barely managed to ignite my ego blade in time. The orange light of my weapon met her shadow blade with a sound like a thunderclap. The force of the blow sent me sliding back 20 meters, my new boots screeching against the obsidian. The crowd leaned in. I could feel a sudden surge of adrenaline hitting my system, and immediately the spectators reacted. A wave of heat rolled off the stands, fueled by their consumption of my excitement. Nice opener, I wheezed, my arms shaking from the impact. But I've had rougher landings on asteroids with broken thrusters. Then show me your flight, Jace Varrow, she commanded. She lunged again, her movements a perfected dance of lethal grace. She wasn't holding back. She was testing every reflex I had. I rolled, dived, and parried, using every bit of zero-G training I'd ever absorbed. I wasn't fighting like a knight. I was fighting like a man trying to survive a hull breach. I used the momentum of her strikes to spin away, kicking off the obsidian pillars that began to rise from the floor as the arena responded to our resonance. You are being defensive, Crix's voice hissed in my ear through a hidden comlink. You are a human. You are supposed to be aggressive, chaotic. Stop trying to match her elegance. Be a disaster. Be a disaster. That was a job description I could actually handle. I looked at Laraxa as she prepared for another charge. I didn't think about the sword. I didn't think about the crowd. I thought about the first time I'd ever piloted a salvage rig into a debris field. I thought about the sheer, reckless joy of threading a needle between two spinning chunks of metal. I deactivated my ego blade. The crowd gasped, a sharp, collective intake of breath that felt like a drop in pressure. Laraxa hesitated, her violet eyes narrowing. Jace, what are you doing? I'm changing the channel, I muttered. As she lunged, I didn't parry. I threw myself forward, sliding on my knees across the slick floor, going right between her legs. As I passed, I grabbed a handful of the fine black sand that collected in the grooves of the arena floor and flung it upward. It wasn't an honorable move. It was a gutter rat move. Laraxa spun, her blade slicing through the air where my head had been a second before. She was surprised. I could feel it through the bond. The shock was bright and sharp, like a flash of lightning, and the crowd went wild. The red eyes in the stands were pulsing with a frantic, chaotic light. They had never seen someone disrespect the Empress in the arena. They had never seen a fighter play dirty. Is that sand? She asked, her voice tinged with a mixture of amusement and genuine confusion. It's called improvisation, Your Majesty, I grinned, standing up and reigniting my orange blade. You should try it sometime. It's better than following a script for 700 years. I didn't wait for her to recover. I charged. I didn't lead with the sword. I led with a shoulder tackle. I slammed into her crystalline armor, and for a second we were locked together. Our resonances collided with the force of two stars merging. The world vanished. Suddenly, I wasn't in the arena. I was in a void of swirling colors. I could see her, not the Empress in armor, but the girl she had been 7 centuries ago. I saw her standing on the balcony of a palace that was still full of light, watching her parents depart for a war they would never return from. I felt her crushing weight of duty, the way she had buried her own heart under layers of obsidian and law to keep her people from fading. I felt her hunger, not for energy, but for a single voice that didn't speak in protocols. And she saw me. She saw the boy who used to hide in the cargo holds of his father's ship to escape the shouting. She saw the man who had lost his wife because he loved the stars more than he loved his own life. Or maybe because he was afraid that if he stayed on the ground, he'd realize how empty he really was. She saw every failure, every broken promise, and every time I'd looked at a bottle of Comet Tail whiskey and thought it was the only friend I had left. "You are so full of cracks, Jace," her voice whispered in the heart of the vision. "Yeah," I replied, my spirit self reaching out to hers. "But that's how the light gets in, right?" The vision shattered as the ancient will made its presence known. A massive, cold shadow loomed over both of us, a consciousness that was ancient, hungry, and entirely devoid of mercy. It didn't care about our budding romance. It didn't care about my jokes. It wanted the synchronization. It wanted the hardcore. The floor of the arena split open. A pillar of white, freezing fire erupted between us, throwing us to opposite ends of the stadium. The crowd was on its feet now, their silent hunger replaced by a low, rhythmic humming that vibrated in my teeth. Lord Draven stood in the high balcony, his face a mask of triumph. "The synchronization is failing," he shouted, his voice amplified by the arena's acoustics. "The human is too fragmented. The ancient will rejects the contamination." He was right. I could feel it. The pressure was becoming unbearable. The will was like a giant hand trying to crush me. Sensing the doubt in my heart, it looked at my flaws, my selfishness, my fear, my history of running away, and it saw a weakness it could exploit. "Jace." Lyraxa's voice was a scream of agony. "It's drawing too much. I can't hold the bridge." She was on her knees, her crystalline armor cracking under the pressure of the planet's demand. The Umbra in the stands were starting to panic, their red eyes flickering. If the bridge broke, the energy backlash would level the city and leave every soul on Nyktos a hollow husk. I looked at the ego blade in my hand. It was flickering, the orange light fading into a dull, muddy gray. I was failing. I was doing exactly what I'd always done. I was being a placeholder, a guy who wasn't quite good enough to save the day. But then I remembered the lesson, the one I'd been running from since I left Earth. Survival isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to stay in the room when the lights go out. I stood up, pushing against the invisible weight of the ancient will. My legs felt like they were going to snap, and my chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. "You want resonance?" I shouted, the words tearing out of my throat. "You want a perfect soul? Well, you're looking at the wrong guy." I started to walk toward Lyraxa. Each step felt like a mile. "I'm a mess," I yelled at the glowing violet sky. "I'm a salvage diver who's afraid of the dark. I'm a man who's lost everything and still finds a way to crack a joke. I'm a collection of bad decisions and broken parts." The ancient will roared back, a psychic wave of cold that nearly knocked me flat. It was showing me my worst memories. The day I was divorced, the day my ship was impounded, the night I sat alone in the rusty bolt and realized no one in the galaxy knew my name. "And you know what?" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Those parts are mine. You don't get to take them. You don't get to erase them to make a pretty light. They're what make me real. They're why I'm here." I reached Lyraxa. I dropped the bone hilt and took her hands. Her armor was shattered, her silver hair matted with blood. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Jace, stop," she gasped. "It will take you. It will consume everything." "Let it," I said, pulling her into a messy, desperate embrace. "If it wants a heart, let's give it a human one." I didn't try to be a king. I didn't try to be a hero. I just opened the door. I let the ancient will see everything. Not just the good parts, but the grease-stained, whiskey-soaked, lonely as hell reality of being Jace Varrow. I gave it my flaws. I gave it my scars. I gave it the absolute, unshakable love I felt for the woman in my arms. A love that was as imperfect and beautiful as a salvaged engine. The world exploded in a burst of amber and violet. When the light finally settled, the silence in the arena was so absolute, You could have heard a single molecule of oxygen drift to the floor. I was still holding Lyraxa, my face buried in her neck, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. My chest was burning, and my skin felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. But I was still there. I was still Jace, and Lyraxa. She was glowing. Not the cold, jagged violet of the Empress, but a soft, warm, multicolored radiance that looked like a nebula in a bottle. Her armor had vanished, replaced by a simple gown of light that shifted between gold, violet, and a deep sunset orange. She looked down at her hands, then at me, her eyes wet with tears that were the color of amethysts. We survived," she whispered, her voice trembling with a shock so profound it reached deep into my own mind. I pulled back, looking around. The arena was different. The obsidian walls were no longer dark. They were translucent, revealing the glowing veins of the planet's core beneath the surface. The gray patches in the distance were gone, replaced by a vibrant, pulsing life force that seemed to be flowing outward from the arena, like a tide. The Umbra in the stands were no longer sitting in silent hunger. They were standing, their red eyes soft and bright. Some were touching their own chests, as if feeling a heartbeat for the first time in centuries. They weren't just fed, they were full. "You did it, Jace," a voice said from the royal balcony. It was Crix. He wasn't perched like a vulture anymore. He was standing tall, his robe fluttering in a breeze that shouldn't have existed in the sealed arena. He looked at me with an expression that was unmistakably, undeniably proud. "You didn't synchronize with the law," Crix said, his voice carrying through the quiet. "You synchronized with the life. You gave the ancient will the one thing it had forgotten in its isolation, the truth of the struggle." I looked up at Lord Draven. The High Counselor was shaking, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "This is impossible," he screamed, though his voice sounded small and tinny against the new resonance of the world. "The human is a commoner. He is flawed. He is broken. The union cannot be legitimate." Lyraxa stood up, her hands still locked in mine. She looked at Draven, and for the first time, she didn't look like a queen looking at a subject. She looked like a woman looking at a ghost. "You are right, Draven," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "He is flawed. He is broken. He is a collection of 1,000 mistakes and 1,000,000 regrets. And that is exactly why he is my king." She turned to the crowd, her radiance flaring. "Citizens of Nyktos, for 700 years we have lived in the cold perfection of the past. We have hoarded our echoes, afraid that any change would lead to our end. We have been a world of statues, waiting for the wind to stop." She squeezed my hand, her warmth flowing through me like a shot of high-grade fuel. "But today this human showed us that life is not found in the silence," she continued. "It is found in the noise. It is found in the cracks. It is found in the willingness to be seen as we truly are. The ancient will has accepted Jace Varrow not because he is perfect, but because he is alive. From this day forward, Nyktos will no longer be a tomb. We will be a beacon. We will open our borders, not as hunters, but as partners. We will learn to generate our own resonance, fueled by the messy, beautiful reality of a galaxy that is finally coming home." The crowd didn't roar. They didn't shout. They began to sing. It was a sound I'll never forget, a wordless, harmonic resonance that felt like every star in the sky was suddenly humming the same tune. It was the sound of 1,000,000,000 years of loneliness finally being answered. I looked at Lyraxa, and for a second, the sarcasm in the armor I'd worn for 34 years just dropped away. I wasn't the salvage diver who'd made a drunken mistake. I wasn't the placeholder. "I guess I'm really in for it now, aren't I whispered, my voice breaking. "No more hiding in the cargo holds." "No more hiding, Jace," she said, leaning in and pressing her forehead against mine. "The void is full of light, and so are you." But the transition wasn't over. As the music of the Umbra filled the air, I felt a sharp, sudden pull in my chest. The synchronization was permanent. I wasn't just a human anymore. I was a part of the planet, and the planet was a part of me. I could feel every Umbra in the city, their sudden joy, their lingering fears, their blossoming hope. It was overwhelming. It was like trying to listen to 10 million radio stations at once. My knees buckled again, and Laraxa caught me, her light wrapping around me like a warm blanket. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's the connection. It will settle. You are just learning to hear the world." It's, it's a lot of noise, Lyraxa," I groaned, clutching my head. "It is the sound of life, my love," she said. "You'll get used to it. After all, you're the one who told us to turn up the volume." We were led out of the arena, not as combatants, but as a single entity. The counselors bowed as we passed, even Drevin, though his bow was stiff and full of a resentment that I could now feel as a cold, sharp itch in the back of my mind. I realized then that my life as a salvage diver was truly over. There would be no more quiet runs to the Horsehead Nebula, no more hiding from my landlords. I was a king, a human king of an alien empire that had just been reborn through my own flaws. As we reached the royal chambers, Crix was waiting for us. He held 2 glasses of a dark, amber liquid that looked suspiciously like Comet Tail whiskey. "A gift from the delegation on Nebula 9, Crix said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "It seems word of your success has already reached the station. The bartender Zog 6 insisted that the king have a proper celebratory drink." I took the glass, the smell of the chemical burn making me laugh until I cried. "To the messy ones," I said, raising the glass to Laraxa. "To the messy ones," she agreed, her amethyst eyes shining with a light that didn't come from any star. We drank, the whiskey burning just the way it was supposed to. As the crimson moon reached the zenith above the palace of Nyktos, the shadows finally retreated. The planet was awake, the void was singing, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for a way out. I was right where I was supposed to be. The transformation was painful, yes. My human body was still adjusting to the psychic load of the Umbra connection, and my mind was still reeling from the exposure of my deepest secrets. But as I looked at Laraxa, I realized that the pain was just the sound of a hull being patched. It was the sound of a life being salvaged. I wasn't a placeholder anymore. I was the bridge. And as the city of Nyktos glowed with a new golden violet light, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the universe didn't make mistakes. It just made connections that were too big for us to see until we were brave enough to scream at the stars. I sat on the edge of the moss bed, watching the moons dance across the sky. I had a kingdom to help rule, a race to help teach, and a wife who could read my every thought. It was the most terrifying, ridiculous, and wonderful salvage job I'd ever taken, and I wouldn't have traded it for all the credits in the galaxy. "Ready for Chapter 9, consort?" Laraxa asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I'm still working on Chapter 8, I joked, though I knew she could feel the truth. "But yeah, let's see what else the void has in store for us. As long as I don't have to wear those crystalline pants Draven was wearing. Those were a crime against fashion." Laraxa's laugh was the only music I needed. The void was silent no more. The palace of Nyktos was no longer a tomb of obsidian silence. It was humming. The vibrations started in the soles of my feet and worked their way up to the base of my skull, a constant, low-frequency thrum that felt like a giant cat purring in the dark. It was the sound of a billion years of geological stagnation finally being jolted into motion. The gray patches, those dead, ash-colored sectors where the planet's energy had completely drained away, were receding. From my balcony, I could see the bioluminescent forests below pulsing with a vibrant, chaotic rhythm that looked less like a machine and more like a heartbeat. It had been 3 days since the arena. 3 days since I'd turned my soul inside out and showed a planet of emotion-starved vampires that being a mess was the only way to stay truly alive. I was currently sitting in the Royal Archives, surrounded by scrolls of crystallized light that contained the entire history of the Umbra. Or at least, I was trying to sit. My nervous system was still recalibrating to the psychic link I now shared with the planet. Every time a palace guard felt a spark of boredom, I got a little itch behind my left ear. Every time a kitchen servant felt the satisfaction of a perfectly prepared meal, my mouth watered. It was like being the switchboard operator for an entire civilization's feelings, and I was still looking for the mute button. "You're brooding again, Jace." Laraxa's voice drifted through my mind, soft and warm as a summer breeze. I turned to see her standing in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her jagged combat armor or her stiff royal gowns. She wore a simple robe of deep indigo silk, her silver hair loose and flowing over her shoulders. Without the heavy mask of the Empress, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and 1,000 times more beautiful. "I'm not brooding," I lied, offering her a tired grin. "I'm just trying to figure out why Lord Draven's anger feels like a cold needle in my ribs. Does he ever take a day off from being a prick?" Laraxa walked over and sat beside me on the stone bench. She reached out and touched the silver filigree on my chest, her fingers tracing the patterns that still glowed with a faint amber light. Through our bond, I felt her amusement, tinged with a lingering, protective worry. "He is a traditionalist, my love. To him, the fact that you survived the synchronization is an insult to every ancestor he's ever worshipped. He's currently in the lower spires trying to convince the trade guilds that our new treaty with the Galactic Coalition will lead to a dilution of the Umbra essence." "Essence?" I snorted. "He means he's afraid he won't be the biggest fish in the pond once we open the borders. I've met guys like him on every station from here to the Inner Rim. They wrap themselves in tradition because they're too scared to admit the world is bigger than their own scrap heap." I leaned back, closing my eyes. "Crick says the first delegation from the Coalition is arriving in 48 hours. A bunch of human diplomats, Zarathi scientists, and probably a few syndicate spies looking for a way to monetize our resonance. Are you ready for that?" Laraxa was quiet for a moment. I could feel her anxiety, a shimmering violet vibration in the back of my mind. "I don't know. For 7 centuries, the only outsiders we saw were the ones we harvested. To speak to them as equals, to trade our technology for their stories. It is a terrifying prospect, Jace." "You'll be fine," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "You've got a secret weapon. Me? I'm an expert in dealing with people who want something for nothing. I'll make sure they don't try to pull any fast ones on us." "You speak as if you are staying," she whispered. I opened my eyes and looked at her. "Where would I go, Laraxa? My ship is impounded. I've got a permanent ban from 3 different sectors, and I'm pretty sure Zog 6 would charge me triple for whiskey just for the publicity. Besides," I pulled her closer, the warmth of our connection drowning out the static of the palace. "I think I'm starting to like the decor here. It's growing on me." She laughed, the melodic sound echoing through the archives. "The council still calls you the accidental king. They think this was all a cosmic glitch." "Let them," I said, my voice turning serious. "The glitch is what saved us. If I had been the perfect, noble warrior they wanted, the ancient will would have just swallowed me whole. It was the fact that I was a broken-down salvage diver that made it wake up. It recognized someone who knew how to survive the dark." The door to the archives hissed open, and Crix entered. He looked significantly less stressed than he had 3 days ago, though his orange eyes were still sharp as razors. He carried a small, holographic projector. "Pardon the interruption, Majesty Consort," Crix said, bowing with a grace that felt a lot less forced these days. "But the first resonance bridge has been completed in the southern provinces. The citizens are, well, they are expressing themselves, quite loudly." He activated the projector. It showed a public square in one of the outlying cities. Instead of the usual silent, red-eyed observers, the square was filled with Umbra who were singing, dancing, and shouting. They weren't just taking energy, they were generating it. The air in the hologram was thick with colors, vibrant greens of growth, bright yellows of joy, and the deep, rich blues of communal belonging. "They look like they're having a riot," I observed, impressed. "They are having a realization," Crix corrected. "They are discovering that they don't have to wait for a harvest to feel alive. Your human methods of emotional expression are spreading, Jace Varrow. I've already seen 3 poetry circles and a group of young nobles attempting to replicate something called sarcasm. They aren't very good at it yet, but the effort is significant." "Sarcasm?" I grinned. "That's a dangerous tool, Crix. Use it wisely, or you'll end up like me, a king with a bruised shoulder and a lot of explaining to do." Crix tilted his head, his eyes flickering with a hint of humor. "I believe we are prepared for the risk. However, there is one matter of urgency. The Ethervox machine you used on the station, we have retrieved it from the rusty bolt. It was in a state of extreme disrepair." I stood up, my salvage diver instincts immediately firing. "You brought it here? Why?" It is the relic that started this, is it not? Lyraxa said, standing beside me. Crix believes that with your knowledge of clunky human technology and our understanding of frequency, we can turn it into something more. A true bridge between Nyktos and the rest of the galaxy. You want me to fix it, I said, feeling a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with royal protocols. I want you to make it better, she replied. I want a way for my people to hear the universe without having to leave the nebula. And I want the universe to hear us, not as predators, but as a voice in the dark. I looked at her, then at the hologram of the singing Umbra. I thought about the lesson I'd learned in the arena. Acceptance, not just of her or of the planet, but of myself. I was the guy who fixed things. I was the guy who saw the value in the scrap. All right, I said, cracking my knuckles. Get me a toolkit, a soldering iron, and about a dozen high-capacity power cells. We're going to turn that piece of junk into the loudest microphone in the Viridian galaxy. As Crix led me away to the workshops, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in an obsidian mirror. I wasn't the disheveled drunk from Nebula 9 anymore. I was a man with a job to do. My suit was clean, my boots were royal, and my heart was finally undeniably full. The aftermath of the arena wasn't just about saving a planet, it was about saving a person. And as I walked through the humming halls of my new home, I realized that the best salvage job I'd ever done was on my own life. The Great Hall of Nyktos was a cathedral of light and glass, overlooking the sprawling obsidian city that was now awake with a billion shimmering violet lights. Today was the day of the Echo Accords. In the center of the hall, a massive table of white crystal had been set up, and seated around it were the most diverse collection of sentience I had ever seen. There were the blue-skinned Zarathi, the insectoid Xylos, the heavy-set human diplomats from the Galactic Coalition, and of course Lyraxa and the Umbra High Council. I stood at the head of the table, not in a chair, but leaning against a pillar with the casual confidence of a man who knew exactly where the emergency exits were. I was wearing my black suit with the silver filigree, but I'd added a small grease-stained bandana to my wrist, a little reminder of where I came from. The terms are simple, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. Nyktos provides the Ethervox technology, the ability to communicate across subquantum frequencies without the need for relay stations. In exchange, the Coalition grants the Umbra Empire full trade rights and, more importantly, access to the cultural reservoir. We want your music, your movies, your books, and your history. We want the resonance of your stories. A portly human diplomat, Ambassador Henderson, adjusted his spectacles. And harvesting? My government is still concerned about the safety of our citizens visiting this sector. We don't want our people coming home feeling like they've had their batteries drained. The harvest is over, Ambassador, I said, stepping forward. The Umbra have learned to generate their own resonance. They don't need to take from you anymore. Think of them as a giant audience. They want to hear your songs, not eat your soul. In fact, if your music is good enough, they'll probably pay you in obsidian crystals that could fund a small moon. And what of Lord Draven's objections? A Zarathi scientist asked, glancing toward the far end of the hall where the conservative faction was standing in stiff, silent protest. I looked at Draven. He was staring at me with a look of pure, concentrated venom. I didn't feel the needle in the ribs anymore. I just felt a mild, annoying static. I'd learned to tune him out. Lord Draven is worried about change, I said, loud enough for him to hear. But change is like a hull breach. You can either try to plug it with your hands while the ship falls apart, or you can use the air pressure to propel yourself to safety. We're choosing to fly. I walked over to the table and picked up the bone hilt of my ego blade. I didn't ignite it. I just placed it next to the treaty documents. I'm a salvage diver, I told the assembly. In my line of work, we don't look for things that are perfect. We look for things that can be fixed. We look for the value in what everyone else has thrown away. This empire was a scrap heap 3 weeks ago. Now it's a beacon. If you want to be a part of that, sign the papers. If you want to stay in the dark, the exit is behind you. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Then Lyraxa stood up. She looked at me, her violet eyes bright with a pride that made my breath hitch. She picked up a stylus made of dark crystal and signed her name at the top of the accords. The Empress has spoken, Crix announced, his voice booming through the hall. Who follows? Ambassador Henderson was the first to move, followed by the Zerathi and even a few of the younger Umbra nobles. One by one, the galaxy's representatives joined the Union. Even Draven, after a long, agonizing pause, walked forward and signed his name with a trembling hand. He didn't do it out of love. He did it because he knew that if he didn't, he'd be left behind in the gray patches of history. As the ceremony concluded and the hall filled with the chatter of a dozen different languages, I felt a familiar presence at my side. Lyraxa took my hand, her fingers warm and steady. You were very authoritative, King Jace, she whispered. I think the messy human approach is working. It's all about the delivery, Your Majesty, I joked. Just give them a choice between progress and a cold exit, and they usually pick the one with the snacks. We walked out onto the balcony, leaving the diplomats to their negotiations. The 3 moons of Nyktos were rising, their red and silver light reflecting off the obsidian towers of the city. Below us, a group of young Umbra were playing a game of catch with a glowing orb of energy, their laughter, real, vocal laughter, drifting up to us on the night air. I looked out at the horizon, at the distant stars I used to think were my only escape. I realized then that I wasn't looking at them with longing anymore. I was looking at them as neighbors. I spent 34 years drifting through the void, convinced that I was just a collection of broken parts and bad luck. I thought that to be worthy of anything, I had to be smooth, polished, and successful. I thought my flaws were the things that made me unlovable, the weights that kept me from ever truly taking flight. But standing here on the edge of a world that I helped bring back to life, I realized that I had it all backward. The cracks in my life weren't failures, they were the access points. It was my loneliness that let me hear Lyraxa's call. It was my fear that allowed me to understand the hunger of the Umbra. It was my messy, chaotic, stubborn humanity that provided the spark the ancient will needed to wake up. We spend so much time trying to salvage our past, trying to repair the damage until we look like brand new ships. But the truth is, a ship with a few patches, a dented hull, and a temperamental engine is the one that's actually been somewhere. It's the one with the stories. I'm not a placeholder anymore. I'm a man who found his resonance in the very things he tried to hide. I'm a king of scrap, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I looked down at the bandana on my wrist, then at the glowing city of Nyktos. I thought about Zog 6 and the rusty bolt. I thought about the stardust mucker and the billions of people still out there, shouting into their own voids. I wonder, as I look out at all those distant lights, how many of you are holding your breath? How many of you are keeping your shouts locked inside because you're afraid the universe won't like the sound of your voice? We spend our lives waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect version of ourselves, before we're brave enough to ask for what we need. But what if the void isn't waiting for your perfection? What if it's just waiting for you to be loud enough to be heard, cracks and all? If you called out today, truly, honestly, messily, who do you think might be listening? I felt Lyraxa lean her head on my shoulder, her silver hair shimmering in the moonlight. I reached out and tapped the console on the balcony rail, activating the newly repaired Ethervox bridge. Testing, 1, 2, 3, I said into the microphone. This is King Jace Varrow of Nyktos. To anyone listening out there in the dark, the bar is open, the music is loud, and we're just getting started. I turned off the mic and pulled my wife closer. As the twin suns of the nebula began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in a riot of orange and violet, I realized I'd finally finished my last salvage job. I wasn't looking for scrap anymore. I was home. I took a deep breath of the thin, sharp air, feeling the heartbeat of a whole world beneath my feet. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be anywhere else. The void had answered, and it was beautiful.